probably not a huge secret that I'm a huge fan and admirer of James O'Keefe and the work that he and his intrepid team of superhero reporters are doing over at Project Veritas. So it was with great interest that I dove into this morning's offerings. We'll put the link to it below. Just check it out for yourself. And I went into it just curious what he and his team of undercover reporters had discovered in the hallowed halls of Twitter regarding things like censoring and shadow banning and the deletion of accounts. And it wasn't hugely shocking to me, but there was a little bit of a pattern that has been somewhat unremarked upon, which is that just about everybody who was talking about banning and shadow banning and censoring and mass deletions, everyone who's talking about doing that was of a particular group, and everyone, just about everyone that they were talking about doing it to, was of another particular ethnic group. Now that seems somewhat important. It'd be lovely to live in a colorblind society, don't you think? So basically there was a whole series of non-whites who were talking about censoring and mass deleting and shadow banning. Who? Well, Republicans and generally whites. So in the question of, how to figure out who to delete, this guy named Pranay Singh says, just go to a random Trump tweet and just look at the followers. They will be all like guns, God, America, and with the American flag and the cross. Who says that? Who talks like that? It's for sure a bot. Boom. Right, targeted, I assume, for suppression or deletion. Pranay Singh then says, to figure out, you use machine learning. You look for Trump or America or any of 5,000 keywords to describe a redneck. A redneck. Now that is a racial epithet. It's like the N-word, but for white people. And to target people based upon ethnicity, right? He's looking to find white people, right? This Indian, I assume, guy, looking for words to describe white people so that they could be targeted for suppression and deletion. Now that seems quite significant, and you should really watch the video and just keep track of who's doing the censoring and who is being targeted. Now the other thing, of course, this is one of the reasons why the government wants H-1B visa applicants to come in from the third world into America or to the West as a whole, because these cultures don't have a history of respecting free speech. And if you look at the people who respect free speech and value free speech and are willing to defend free speech, it generally is whites and it's generally males. So here we have the ancient tyrannies of the old world at war with the relatively spanking fresh new liberties of the new world, and it doesn't seem like the new world and the liberties are particularly winning. So Twitter has a guy saying the word redneck to describe white people. That is an astonishingly immoral and racist epithet. The other thing, too, is he says, just go to a random Trump tweet and just look at the followers. They will be all like guns, God, America, like him with an American flag, and the cross. See, that is, I assume, part of the algorithm to target people for suppression, shadow banning, or deletion. So when he says God, okay, obviously, right, Second Amendment guns, when he's talking about God in this context, he's talking about Christians. He's talking about the Christian God. So he's looking for God combined, I assume, with guns and the cross, you see, the central, most foundational symbol of Western Christianity, of Christianity as a whole, of course, the cross. So not only does it appear that Twitter is targeting whites, but they're also targeting Christians. I assume the two in combination are their sweet spot. So what that means, of course, is that here you have not just racially, but religiously motivated censorship. Now, just to put this in context, imagine if this video had been shot by an Indian guy, and at Twitter's headquarters were endless images of whites giggling about how they were targeting Muslims, using the N-word against Muslims, and mass banning Muslim accounts based upon Muslim religious imagery. The world would go insane, and the bigotry, the racism, the intolerance would be clear for everyone to see. So, that is the reality, it seems, of what is going on in Twitter. Because it is white Christians who are being targeted, nobody seems to have noticed. Nobody seems to be commenting. Nobody seems to be talking about it. So it falls to me again. If it were Muslims, if it were blacks, everybody would be going mental. But it's just white Christians, you see. What do they matter? You know, white Christians, just shut up and pay your taxes. It's only white Christians. They never get mad, do they? Well, this turn the other cheek is okay for a while. Basically, what Christians do is they gather information about who is mistreating them, whether it's a one-time accident or whether it's a pattern of prejudice and bigotry. So if you think that Christians never get mad, you need to study your history. Actually, they do. They get very angry. And it might be about time.
James Damore, I talked about this. This is the guy who put out a manifesto, a Google employee put out a manifesto saying that women, may make different choices that keep them from rising to the top of technology. And he was fired, and he has sued Google. And some of the stuff that he says Google is doing is utterly nuts. So, for instance, in a section of his lawsuit claiming that Google tries to stifle conservative parenting style, the suit reads, Google furnishes a large number of internal mailing lists catering to employees with alternative lifestyles, including furries, people who dress up as stuffed animals, polygamy, transgenderism, and plurality for the purpose of discussing sexual topics. The only lifestyle that seems to not be openly discussed on Google's internal forums is traditional heterosexual monogamy. So they are trying to change the culture by changing what people can say. And if you go on and you look at Google now has a fact checker. It has a fact-checking thing. So if you look something up, it tells you the fact check. It only fact-checks us. It fact-checks the Daily Wire. It fact-checks other conservative sites. It does not fact-check left-wing sites. So the idea that Google is now selling, and is selling it very hard, is that leftism is truth, and right-wingery is just a lie. It's just an entire lie. I'm reading this book about the immigration crisis in Europe and how it's destroying Europe. And at one point, Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, who started this, who brought all these people, these Syrians into Europe, she said to Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, this is in the book, what could be done to stop European citizens from writing criticisms of our migration policy on Facebook? Are you working on this? She asked him. And Zuckerberg said, yes, he was. In fact, our friend over at Project Veritas, our friends over at Project Veritas have put out a new video where they've captured people on Twitter saying that they are shadow banning conservative voices. So the people like me don't know that we've been banned. We just are still putting stuff up, but nobody's reacting to it because they are banning it without letting us know. Here's just an excerpt of Project Veritas's catching these people on secret video.
The idea of the shadow ban is that you ban someone, but they don't know they've been banned because they keep posting, but no one sees their content. So they just think that no one's engaging with their content when in reality no one's seeing it. I don't know if Twitter does this anymore.
How do you know if it's a bot and not a normal person?
You use machine learning. You look for Trump or America and you have like 5,000 keywords to describe a redneck. And then you look and you parse all the messages, all the pictures, and then you look for stuff that matches that stuff.
So is it gonna essentially ban certain mindsets and or people who could be negative?
No, it's not gonna ban a mindset. It's gonna ban a way of talking.
Do you have access to DMs of Twitter?
Oh, I do.
It's a lot of bad press if people figure out that you're shadow banning them. It's like unethical in some way.
Trying to downrank it. We're trying to get the people not to show up.
Now, one of the reasons we like Donald Trump and we enjoy him is that Trump is playing the same game they're playing. Trump is basically saying, oh, okay, if there's no reality, and Trump believes this, I think, if there's no reality, then I'm going to confront your reality with my reality. And what we enjoy about him is he doesn't care if they call him racist. He doesn't care if they call him sexist. He just puts forward his alternative point of view, which in many cases, like a Venn diagram, intersects with what conservatives believe to be the truth. Now, there are people who have they're clutching their pearls saying, oh, my God, now we're just one of them. But this is just politics. This is why I don't get too excited about this. However, Steven Pinker, in a speech that sounded almost exactly like the speech I gave in Silicon Valley at Christmas time, Steven Pinker at Harvard, he's a Harvard psychologist. I've read his books. They're really entertaining. He put forward this idea that essentially, and I've put forward this idea too, it's funny, he's a Harvard professor, and I'm just a barefoot teller of tales, and yet we're saying the same thing. But he put forward this idea that when you keep people from the truth, you open up the path toward hatred, toward fascism. We were talking about this with Sebastian Gorka yesterday, that when you won't let people say, hey, maybe mass immigration is a bad thing, then the only people who will say it are Nazis, and the Nazis begin to talk sense, and that's a very dangerous situation. So here is Steven Pinker on a panel. It's a really wonderful moment where he simply talks about things that are obviously true that no one is allowed to say, and then he talks about what happens if you're not allowed to say them. Now, I'll add that part at the end, but just listen to the basic common sense that comes out of his mouth.
So here is a fact that's going to sound ragingly controversial, but is not, and that is that capitalist societies are better than communist ones. Okay, so if you doubt it, then just ask yourself the question: would I rather live in South Korea or North Korea? Would I rather live in West Germany in the 1970s or East Germany or in the 1960s? So this is not, I submit that this is actually not a controversial statement, but in university campuses, it is would be considered flamingly radical. Number two, here's another one. Men and women are not identical in their life priorities, in their sexuality, in their tastes and interests. Again, this is not controversial to anyone who is even glanced at the data. The kind of vocational interest tests of the kind that your high school guidance counselor gave you have been given to millions of people. And men and women give different answers as to what they want to do for a living and how much time they want to allocate to family versus career and so on. But you can't say it. I mean, very famous person on this campus did say it, and we all know what happened to him. And he's no longer, well, he is on this campus, but no longer in the same office. Here's a third fact that is just not controversial, although it sounds controversial, and that is that different ethnic groups commit violent crimes at different rates. You can go to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, look it up on their website. The homicide rate among African Americans is about 7 or 8 times higher than it is among European Americans. And terrorism, go to the Global Terrorist Database, and you find that worldwide, the overwhelming majority of suicide terrorist acts are committed by Islamist extremist groups.
So Pinker's point is that if you've been lied to about all these very simple facts, men and women are different, Islamists create most terrorist acts, blacks commit more murders. If you are not allowed to say these things, when you discover them, you are in danger of becoming part of the alt-right. This is what he's saying. He's against the alt-right, as I am against the alt-right. And he's saying when you find out that women and men are different, you might suddenly think that women are inferior. If you find out that blacks and whites are different, you might suddenly think that racism has a point. And that is not the truth. That is not the truth. You know, somebody yelled at me the other day, a couple of people yelled at me the other day when I said that when women take over an industry, it's because the industry has become obsolete, that men basically move in, they create the industry. And they said, what a sexist thing to say. And I was joking about it being sexist. It's not sexist because it's only feminism that accepts that building an industry is more important than building a human being, that building an industry is more important than raising people and nurturing people and teaching people right from wrong, that those two things, that somehow building an industry is a bigger deal. It's only feminism that accepts that, and of course masculine sexism that accepts those things. I do not accept those principles, and this is what I want to get to. What I want to get to is this. it is each one of us are warriors in this fight for the truth. And each one of us must speak the truth fearlessly, even when people call us racist, even when it threatens our livelihood, even when it threatens, and I've been through all of this, so I'm not just saying this off the top of my head, but even when it threatens our standing in the community, we must speak the truth. But we mustn't let we mustn't mistake the truth. Hatred for the truth. We mustn't mistake hatred for the truth. It remains true that all of us, men and women, are made in the image of God, and that in loving God, we have to also love one another. This is basic stuff. This is basic Christian religious stuff. We must do this. And if you are finding the truth, if you are speaking the truth, you have to speak it through this a filter of love. And if you don't, you've ceased to speak the truth at all, really. You've used the truth in the service of lies. So this is the danger that we face, the moral hazard that we face. But each one of us really has a role to play in doing this. I'm Andrew Klavan. This is The Andrew Klavan Show. Listen to Another Kingdom, please, on iTunes. And I will see you here on Monday, if you survive the Klavanless weekend.
So, are big media companies cracking down on conservative news? We'll talk about it. A couple stories say they are. Plus, there's a Harvard professor who's now being ripped apart for supposedly supporting the alt-right. Is he? We'll talk about that too. And the Obama Library, I promised it to you yesterday. You will get it today. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. You're going to have to wait a little bit more for the Obama Library because I promise you, you're going to want to see the pictures. If you have not seen it, it is an atrocity. I mean, it's just an aesthetic atrocity. We'll get to that in just a second. Plus, Project Veritas actually does something really good today. I've said this before about James O'Keefe, that James is, he does some really good stuff. He can be hit or miss, but he did, I think, a service to the conservative public today. I'll explain why. Let us begin with James O'Keefe. So James O'Keefe made some real news yesterday because he had talked to an insider over at Twitter, a former Twitter staffer, and this Twitter staffer explained in full living detail how it is that Twitter apparently shadow bans people, where Twitter will downgrade particular tweets, prevent people from seeing them. I've heard this about my own tweets in the past, that I'll tweet something out and people who follow me don't actually see the tweet. It's really disturbing. Here's a little bit from the James O'Keefe tape. This is Undercover tape with one of the members of the Twitter staff.
Let's say it was a pro-Trump thing, and I am anti-Trump. I was like, oh, I banned this whole account. It'll go to you, and then it's at your discretion. And if you're anti-Trump, you're like, oh, you know what, Mo was right. Let it go.
The idea of the shadow ban is that you ban someone, but they don't know they've been banned because they keep posting, but no one sees their content. So they just think that no one's engaging with their content, when in reality no one's seeing it. I don't know if Twitter does this anymore.
How do you know if it's a bot and not a normal person?
You use machine learning. You look for Trump or America, and you have like 5,000 keywords to describe a redneck, and then you look and you parse all the messages, all the pictures, and then you look for stuff that matches that stuff.
So it's a little bit hard to hear. Here's what they're saying. So there's a guy named Abhinav Vadrevu, who's a former Twitter software engineer, and he says shadow banning takes place. He says one strategy is to shadow ban so you have ultimate control. The idea of a shadow ban is that you ban someone, but they don't know they've been banned because they keep posting and no one sees their content. So they just think no one is engaging with their content when in reality, no one is seeing it. Twitter software engineer Stephen Pierre said, quote, every single conversation is going to be rated by a machine, and the machine is going to say whether or not it's a positive thing or a negative thing. And whether it's positive or negative doesn't, and then it's inaudible. It's more like if somebody's being aggressive or not, right? Somebody's just cursing at somebody, they may have a point, but it will just vanish. It's not going to ban the mindset, it's going to ban a way of talking. Alinda Hassan is a policy manager for Twitter's Trust and Safety Team, which is the most Orwellian name. And they say they are working on downranking bad people. It's something we're working on. We're trying to get the bleepy people not to show up. It's a product thing that we're working on right now. And then there was another guy who you heard at the very beginning, a guy named Mo Norai, who's a Twitter content review agent. And they say that in the past, they would manually ban or censor pro-Trump or conservative content. They said, if this is pro-Trump, I don't want it because it offends me. And I say I ban this whole thing, and then it goes over here, and they're like, oh, you know what? I don't like it too. Mo's right. Let's go. Let's carry on. What's next? They said that more left-leaning content would go through their selection process with less political scrutiny. Okay, this is not a tremendous shock. If you've ever been on Twitter, there's been a lot of talk about this for years. This has been rumored for years. Obviously, the people who have been banned on Twitter, and they're people who I am not particularly fond of, some of the alt-right Twitter trolls, the people who have been banned, I'm not a fan of their stuff. But the idea that they get banned and a bunch of people on the left don't get banned for similar content from the left is just insane to me. It's not a shock that Twitter is downgrading content. We found out earlier this week, by the way, that Google is basically downgrading content from conservatives. How do we know? Because right now, if you go over to google.com and you search the name of the website that I run, Daily Wire, which is a fully credible site. Okay, most of what we do is aggregate news from other sources. Most of what we are doing is taking the news and then adding a bit of commentary to it. So it's very rare that we actually report original news at Daily Wire. Nonetheless, if you actually go over to Daily Wire on Google and you search Daily Wire, there's something that pops up. And what pops up is something that says on the right side of the page, writes about, and then it'll show some of our old pieces. And then there's a thing that you click on, and it says reviewed claims. Okay, reviewed claims are a bunch of claims that come from Snopes and Climate Feedback and FactCheck.org. In fact, all of the leftist fact-checking organizations, and Snopes is a left-wing fact-checking organization. They have a nasty habit of taking a factual statement a right-winger makes and then drawing some sort of conclusion from that statement and then arguing with the conclusion that they are drawing from that statement. PolitiFact, they'll do the same thing. Right? A lot of these fact-checking organizations aren't actually fact-checking the fact that's being espoused. Instead, what they are doing is fact-checking some conclusion that they draw from the fact. So, for example, I remember PolitiFact did a very long review of a video that I did about how many people in Muslim countries have extremist beliefs. My entire video was based on poll results from Pew Research Global, right? It was the entire video that I did, and you can view it, it has several million hits at this point, is me just saying a certain percentage of the population of Pakistan believes suicide bombings are okay, for example. So what did PolitiFact do? They couldn't argue with any of the poll numbers I was citing. Instead, they argued with my definition of extremist. So when I said that it is extremist to believe that Sharia law should rule, they would say, well, that depends on your definition of Sharia law. Are they just saying that Sharia law should rule in their own country or globally? Okay, that's you arguing with my definition. That doesn't mean what I'm saying is false, right? You're arguing with my conclusion, which is fine, but that's a matter of opinion. That's not a matter of fact. PolitiFact ranked my entire video false. The most hilarious part of that PolitiFact fact check is that they did their own calculation. They found that something like 20% of the entire Muslim population on planet Earth was extreme by their own calculation, meaning that some 200 million people are extreme. And then in their own fact check, they say, but we don't want to draw that conclusion or anything. Well, we were not comfortable with the conclusions that we're drawing. The reason all this is a problem is because there's an attempt now to reassert gatekeeping from the top. There's an attempt that's happening right now in real time to reassert the gatekeeping of news. And a lot of this is driven by the fake news mania that the left has pushed in the aftermath of Hillary Clinton losing the election. So Hillary lost. We can't just say she lost because she's a crappy candidate. Instead, we're going to say the reason that she lost is because of fake news. It's because people were putting out stuff that was false. Now, there are stories that are actually false. There are stories about how Pizzagate was real, for example, where there's no factual basis to it whatsoever. Okay, that's actual fake news. Then there's stuff you disagree with. And unfortunately, because the left disagrees with so much of what the right has to say, what you see very often is the left actually engaging in a process where they will shut down the dissemination of conservative-oriented news because they're saying it's afactual or counterfactual. That's not true. That's not true. So you've seen there's been talk about this on some of the major websites. It's certainly true on Google, that how you search on Google is very different than the search results that you receive from another web engine like Bing. Obviously, Twitter has been downgrading conservatives for a while. So what James O'Keefe uncovered here is something that's very troubling. It's one of the reasons why, for example, YouTube has gotten itself in serious trouble. They demonetized a video that I did with Dave Rubin the other day, which is the least controversial political video of all time. They demonetized a conversation that I did with Blair White on transgenderism, which is a very friendly conversation with a transgender person about the pronouns that ought to be used in addressing transgender people. That was demonetized. Right? YouTube has demonetized a lot of the Prager University videos, so much so that Prager University is suing YouTube. And now, is that a lawsuit that can sustain? I'm not sure it can because these are all private companies. But it is certainly true that we do have a troubling situation that people should know about when all of the major ways that you gain your news are being curated by a bunch of lefties on the top who are biasing the news feed in favor of their own favorite political beliefs, knowing that other media outlets will praise them for doing so. So good on O'Keefe for doing this, and this is something you should keep an eye on. Just because news is being downgraded by an outlet does not mean that that news is fake news. I mean, as I say, Daily Wire is now has these reviewed claims over at Google. Guess what doesn't? Slate, Huffington Post, Salon, right? None of these have this, right? None of them. CNN, none of them have the reviewed claims aspect. Instead, they're just using left-wing fact checkers to fact check. It's not just Daily Wire, by the way. It's Daily Caller, it's The Federalist. It's only right-wing sites, basically, which is just insane. In other ways that the left has been shutting down debate, there is this tape going around of Steven Pinker. Steven Pinker is not a right-wing figure. Steven Pinker is a professor at Harvard. I took a class when I was at Harvard Law School with Pinker and Alan Dershowitz, which is kind of a fun class. And Pinker is, of course, the author of a book called The Blank Slate. One of the things that makes Pinker controversial among a lot of people on the left is that Pinker doesn't believe in the ultimate malleability of human beings. He believes that the reason he titled his book The Blank Slate is because he was saying that perception of humans, that we are a blank slate and that we don't have any natural inclinations, we don't have any natural presets, he says that's nonsense. And that means that we're constantly battling with our own nature in order to change. Well, Steven Pinker was doing a panel for Spiked Magazine, the Unsafe Space Tour panel at Harvard. Pinker has come under fire recently because he'll say things that are true, like women may have different interests than men do in the career space, which may account for some of the discrepancies between men and women in terms of science staffing. Right? He'll say things like, statistically speaking, blacks commit crimes more often than whites. And then he'll explain why that is, that has nothing to do with race per se. It has more to do with culture. It has more to do with history. It maybe has to do with poverty. But he's willing to say facts that people on the left aren't willing to say. So Pinker, in discussing this, starts talking about how political correctness has really led to the rise of the alt-right. And what political correctness has done is it has said to a lot of people that you're not even allowed to say facts like men and women are different or that races commit crimes at different rates. Because if you say that, then people are afraid of the conclusions you're going to draw. So we were talking earlier about how the fact-checking organizations do this. They don't like the poll results that I cite, so instead they argue with the conclusion that I cite and then label the polls that I cite false. Right? This is what Pinker says. He says, if you can't even acknowledge the on-the-ground facts, what you're actually doing is helping people in the alt-right. Because here's the logic. There are a bunch of people in the alt-right or who are not even in the alt-right yet. And they will say, listen, I'm looking at the statistics, and what I see is that black people commit more crimes than white people on an average per capita basis. And then people on the left will go, that's not true. You can't say that. You're a racist. And then people on the right will say, people who, not even on the right, people who will see that fact will say, well, if it's taboo for me to even cite that fact, maybe it's taboo, maybe it's also taboo but not false to be racist about that fact, to suggest that the race is inherently what's driving the crime. Right? If the politically correct people would say, that's a true fact, now here's the explanation that has nothing to do with racism, which, by the way, is not a left thing. Right? It's something that I do on a regular basis when I'm arguing against the alt-right. But the left won't do that. The left won't acknowledge the common basis of fact. Instead, they'll just say you're not allowed to mention the fact because the fact itself is racist. So this is what Pinker says, and Pinker just got shellacked for this. I mean, he's just getting destroyed by the left. Here's what Pinker had to say in his own words.
The other way in which I do agree with my fellow panelists that political correctness has done an enormous amount of harm in the sliver of the population that might be, wouldn't want to say persuadable, but certainly whose affiliation might be up for grabs, comes from the often highly literate, highly intelligent people who gravitate to the alt-right, internet savvy, media savvy, who often are radicalized in that way, who swallow the red pill, as the saying goes, the illusion from the Matrix, when they are exposed to the first time to true statements that have never been voiced in college campuses or in the New York Times or in respectable media, that are almost like a bacillus to which they have no immunity. And they are immediately infected with both a feeling of outrage that these truths are unsayable, and no defense against taking them to what we might consider to be rather repellent conclusions. So here is a fact that's going to sound ragingly controversial, but is not, and that is that capitalist societies are better than communist ones. Here's another one. Men and women are not identical in their life priorities, in their sexuality, in their tastes and interests. A third fact that is just not controversial, although it sounds controversial, and that is that different ethnic groups commit violent crimes at different rates. Now, if you've never heard these facts before, and you stumble across them, or someone mentions them, it is possible to to come to some extreme conclusions, such as that women are inferior, that African Americans are naturally violent, that we all ought to be anarcho-capitalists and do away with all regulation and social safety nets, that most terrorism in this country is the fault of Muslims. The first time you hear them, you're apt to say, number one, the truth has been withheld from me by universities, by mainstream media. And moreover, you will be vindicated when people who voice these truths are suppressed, shouted down, assaulted. All the more reason to believe that the left, that the mainstream media, that universities can't handle the truth. So the politically correct left is doing itself an enormous disservice.
Okay, we can stop it there. So we can hear him say, right, is that the point here is that people are taking these facts and then they're drawing the wrong conclusions. But when the left argues that the facts don't exist, it's driving people to embrace the wrong conclusions. So he's anti-alt-right. He's trying to explain why the politically correct left is creating the alt-right. It's the same stuff that I've been saying on this program for years. Right? It's the same thing that I've said about the identity politics of the left, that when you push an identity politics that suggests that race and ethnicity are primary, you can't be surprised when people who are not of your race and ethnicity start to treat their own race and ethnicity as primary. It's a mistake by those people. They shouldn't be doing it. But you have to acknowledge the forces at work in the universe that are pushing people toward these nasty, horrible groups. And there's no one who's more anti-alt-right than I am. I think I can safely say that, considering I was their number one target in 2016, and that I've been ragingly anti-alt-right ever since they became a prominent force in the American political scene. Pinker just gets destroyed for this. So there are a bunch of people on the left who think now that Pinker isn't, that they think Steven Pinker, the leftist Harvard professor, who is on the left, okay, I took a class with him, I've read his books. Steven Pinker is not a right-winger. Okay, he's an atheist. He believes in government programs, big government programs. He's ripped as an alt-righter. So P.Z. Myers of Free Thought Blogs wrote that Pinker's sympathies lie with the alt-right. That's an absolute slander. He says, I am shocked that a Harvard professor would promote such ignorance and falsehoods. But of course, none of the facts that Pinker states there are mildly rebuttable. They're not rebuttable, and Myers makes no attempts to rebut them. Joshua Loftus, a professor at New York University, he said that Pinker's ideas were worse than the edited clip. They're just amazing. Jamel Bowie of Slate, who I've had fights with over this sort of stuff before, he suggested that Pinker had claimed that blacks cause crime and Jews control the world, which of course is not what Pinker is saying, right? What Pinker is saying is that black people in America have a higher crime rate. But then he explicitly denounces the idea that the race is connected with the crime rate. He says there are other factors that are relevant in assessing whether race is connected with crime. And to come to the conclusion that race causes crime is stupid. Right, but people are ignoring that because they're using exactly the same sort of PC censorship that Pinker is talking about that drives people to the alt-right. Right? Professor Jesse Daniels of Hunter College says, if one were, say, writing a book about the mainstreaming of white nationalism, one would certainly consider featuring this as supporting evidence for one's main point. Okay, this is insane. Okay, that's not real. That's not what Pinker is saying at all. But that's the astonishing thing about the left, is they are so utterly incapable of even looking internally at what they've done to promote this nastiness, that instead they continue to engage in exactly the same tactics that make the nastiness more likely and more prominent. It's really an incredible thing. When you're ripping down Steven Pinker, it's so funny. When I was going to Harvard Law, Alan Dershowitz was on the left and Steven Pinker was on the left. And now, by the time I went there, I graduated in 2007. Now, 11 years later, Steven Pinker is on the right. Apparently, he's now an alt-righter, and Alan Dershowitz is a Trumpkin. Okay, I don't think that Alan Dershowitz and Steven Pinker changed all that much. I think the left changed all that much. I think the same left that decided that Larry Summers, who was ousted from the presidency of the university when I was there for stating that women may have different aptitudes and interests in science and math than men, right? That same university now says that Steven Pinker is to be ousted, that Steven Pinker has to be targeted. You wonder how people like Sam Harris and Steven Pinker and I all end up on the same side of the aisle on this stuff, and we disagree about virtually everything else? Maybe the reason is because the left is so extreme and radical that they're driving away an entire contingent of people who just want to talk about facts, even if they draw different conclusions from those facts. I cannot have a discussion with people who will not operate in the same world of facts that I operate. I can have a discussion with Steven Pinker, and that, I think, is what drives the left up a wall. And so instead they use censorship as a way of preventing honest and open discussion about issues that matter. We'll be back here tomorrow with all the latest in news and opinion, of course. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.
before I went on air today, I got a text and an email from James O'Keefe from Project Veritas. And you, if you're watching this now, will not have heard this yet. But he has released the latest in his American Pravda series. And if you recall, he's done the New York Times, the Washington Post, he's trying to CNN. He's getting inside media organizations in America that purport to be neutral purveyors of truth, but which actually are militating against conservative and libertarian ideas behind the scenes. Of course, the worst offenders, if not the most powerful offenders, they are actually the most powerful offenders. The worst and most powerful offenders aren't media companies, they're technology companies. And the most partisan of them all is, of course, Twitter. So here is a press release that I just got from James, and the video is going to go up on my Facebook, but you can also go and see the video. We didn't quite get it in time to play it for you today, but the video is going to be on my Facebook. You can go and find it at Project Veritas. Undercover video of Twitter engineer Clay Haynes saying, "We're more than happy to help the Department of Justice with their little investigation." Well, what little investigation was this? This is a senior Twitter developer who revealed to Project Veritas operatives that Twitter was happy to hand over Trump's private DMs, the private messages that Donald Trump has been sending through his Twitter account, and all of the deleted messages too, to the Department of Justice. Now, it's not clear whether the DOJ asked for them, subpoenaed them, whether it's subject to an active investigation, or whether Twitter is voluntarily offering up messages from the President of the United States, private messages, and even including deleted private messages from the President of the United States to the Department of Justice for what purpose we don't know. So I'm going to read this to you in full because it's just come in and you won't know about it yet. Content disclosed to the Department of Justice includes even messages he's deleted, quote, any direct messages, end quote. The engineer is a self-proclaimed, quote, bleeding heart liberal, stating it comes with the territory, meaning it comes with the territory at Twitter. And he goes on to explain additional big brotherish practices at Twitter. I'm going to read it to you in full, actually, because it's amazing. A Project Veritas undercover investigation has revealed a senior network security engineer at Twitter stating that his company is more than happy to turn over the private communications and the deleted tweets of President Donald Trump to the Department of Justice. If this is true, it is yet unknown whether Twitter is voluntarily disclosing the sensitive information or acting under a court order. Twitter is currently in the midst of defending itself from left-leaning criticism that President Trump hasn't been removed from the enormous media platform for violations of Twitter's terms of service. And according to his LinkedIn profile, this guy, Clay Haynes, has been employed by Twitter since September 2016. He met with a Project Veritas undercover journalist at Stooky's Club Moderne in San Francisco in January of this year. This is January, so this is after all of the after Roger's maybe is this after Roger Stone's lawsuit was announced? Yes, it must be. After Charles Johnson, they know is going to sue. After everything that happened with me, they are still happily, merrily saying that they are going to hand over private information from the president to actors unknown in the deep state. Absolutely amazing. When prompted, Mr. Haynes provides additional details. He says, basically giving them every single tweet he's posted, even the ones he's deleted, any direct messages and any mentions. And the guy says, quote, he's dangerous, meaning President Trump. I don't like him and he's a terrible human being and I want to get rid of him, the self-described bleeding heart liberal Haynes said in the video. In fact, we had internal reviews about that, end quote. January 7th of this year, James O'Keefe himself, this goes to show how stupid these companies are. I mean, Twitter's not a massive organization. The HQ of Twitter in San Francisco is not the biggest office in the world. And these guys don't know what James O'Keefe looks like by now. They're not being warned about this stuff.
Well, they've had 8 years to figure it out?
8 years to figure out that we're coming for them. James O'Keefe went himself undercover with Haynes to Morton Steakhouse in San Francisco. Obviously, James was paying. To confirm if Twitter was working with the Department of Justice to hand over Trump's tweets and DMs. When pressed about looking at Donald Trump's messages, Haynes explained, we have a subpoena process for that very reason. The conversation continued. James O'Keefe said, are you working with the Department of Justice currently on that? And Clay Haynes replied, I can't comment. Even if I knew, I wouldn't comment. So James O'Keefe has said today, even if there is no active investigation, even if there's nothing to comment on, it shows, what this demonstrates beyond doubt. Given his comments, he said it goes with the territory. And it goes with the territory of Twitter, finding Trump abhorrent. It goes. This is proof positive of what we have all suspected for years that the internal politics of Twitter are irretrievably biased toward the left. The question is, says James, quote, by Twitter giving private information about the president to the Justice Department, are they breaking the law? Are they betraying a trust, following an official request, or satisfying a political agenda by leading a crusade against the president? Mr. Haynes, that's end quote. Mr. Haynes describes himself as the bouncer of the network. Bouncers, and for those viewers who are not familiar, our incel audience, it's another word for a nightclub doorman who lets people in and out of the nightclub. You see Twitter characterizing itself as a private club from which you can be ejected for reasons of politics. This is the fourth investigation in the Project Veritas series, the American Pravda series. And James O'Keefe, of course, has just finished a book about this called American Pravda, My Fight for Truth in the Era of Fake News, which is coming out on January the 16th. Amazing. I encourage Milo watchers to keep an eye on this series because there are more Twitter videos to come. James has told me, and that's all I'm going to say on that subject for the time being.
Justice in their little investigation. All right, that, of course, the latest from Project Veritas. James O'Keefe, who joins us now, he's the founder of Project Veritas, with some breaking news, and their latest video exposes what we have all long suspected, and that is that social media platforms are misusing their access, their control over your personal information. And today, James O'Keefe is revealing in this video, and we'll put it up on Hannity.com, it's on Project Veritas's video site, of course, revealing that Twitter employs a network engineer who admits to hacking President Trump's account and bragging about his ability to read all of his direct messages and revive deleted tweets and secure passwords. And upsetting as all of this gets, it gets worse. Then you have Twitter employees admitting to giving this private information to the Department of Justice and looking at Julian Assange's account, among other things. Anyway, talk about privacy being dead. It's dead. James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, how are you?
Hey, Sean, thanks for having me on, and this is the first in a series of videos, undercover, inside Twitter, confirming suspicions. We always thought they were sharing our private direct messages with government or with people or selling it. We always thought they were shadow banning people from timelines. Well, Project Veritas has launched a very ambitious undercover investigation exposing it, and thanks for playing all that sound. There is some breaking news. Twitter did issue a statement.
Well, I've got that statement in front of me, and they responded to it. And what they're saying is, in this particular case, the individual depicted in the video was speaking in a personal capacity and does not represent or speak for Twitter. Twitter only responds to valid legal requests and does not share any user information with law enforcement without such a request.
Right. So they're kind of throwing him under the bus there, and they're saying that he was speaking in his personal capacity. But, Sean, if anyone at Twitter would know, this guy is not a low-level IT guy. He's a senior network security engineer. And after talking to people who know this business, he is the person at Twitter that would know that they can do this. They're willing to do it. They're able to do it. They may be doing it. And he says it's, quote, creepy, very big brotherish. He calls himself the bouncer of the network. He's talking about how they are taking Trump down, that Trump's taking the country down, and they have to take him down. So it's very interesting to see how he articulates his philosophy towards Trump and what they're willing to do. By the way, the employee himself, a guy named Clay Haynes, is the senior network engineer, actually tweeted this morning that, quote, this is no fun.
Yeah, he wrote this. Well, this is no fun.
Right. So
I'm sure it's not.
So Twitter thinks he's an isolated incident, Sean, but you know my MO. In fact, you've seen some of the tape that's going to come out. We have so many of their people on tape, and we put them in a box where they say, oh, this is just a rogue employee saying this, and then we release more. So Twitter's going to have to face the facts here over the next few days.
Can you get into how many installments we have on this?
There's a few. There's more than 3, and while this one focuses on them cooperating with the Justice Department, which, by the way, Tim Cook at Apple fought subpoenas logging into people's phones when it came to terrorists. So I think that their leadership, I think the CEO needs to respond to their attitude about even complying with subpoenas. It's news that there's a subpoena against Twitter for Trump's private direct messages. The next video, Sean, will likely focus on this whole concept of shadow banning. That's muting someone from the timeline so that we
explain what that means, because a lot of people don't know what that means.
Well, I'm going to get into it probably tomorrow, but it means that you can tweet something out, and you think that your tweets are going to all of your followers, but your followers don't see what you write on their timeline. Twitter is the town square, and because they can screw with these algorithms and adjust things, they can actually censor you without you even knowing it. And that's what these videos are going to show. And we've always suspected it. Now we're going to prove it with their words, not mine.
All right, so this is an amazing thing. Walk us through the entire operation that you had here, because it was pretty sophisticated, or I don't know if you want to go into all the details, but you managed to actually get Twitter people to come to you.
Well, Sean, it's hard for me to get into the specific aliases, but I will say, Sean, that I take a lot of heat at Project Veritas, and you know that we did when we went after CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post for the aliases that we use. We use a variety of aliases to get people to open up to us, and we never break the law, and we never try to lie to the American people. We never deceive publicly, but we go undercover. We pose as something that we're not.
I know that a lot of people were attacking you when the Washington. When I guess somebody figured out it was you, and I'm like, all right, good for them. So what? That doesn't negate all the times that you've gotten incredible exposés on corrupt institutions. I mean, that doesn't take away the other good work you've done. But yeah, some people they're so afraid of you. I mean, that to me is a good thing. It means you've been effective.
Yes, we're getting flack. I mean, we get vociferously attacked, but we use a variety of aliases. We pose as terrorists, drug dealers, pimps, hookers, child abusers, rape victims. In this case, we posed as a headhunter, and we did other aliases. We can't get into the alias, but we entice them into a meeting. They want to meet with us. They want to spill the beans about their trade secrets, about the things that they're doing that are wrong. And then we secretly record the interaction in public places where there's no expectation of privacy. This operation took us about a year. This is the first video. As you know, Sean, there's always more videos. And I think this is going to change the way people see the world. When they see and hear in this video that they're looking at your direct messages, and there's more on this. They're sharing your direct messages. They're looking at them. And the things that these people say about what they do with your your private like text DMs or text messages on Twitter, it is going to outrage people. Heads are going to roll. There are probably going to be congressional hearings after this whole thing is done. And this is just part one. This is just part one.
Many of my friends on Twitter, and I have the Let Not Your Heart Be Troubled Twitter Army Brigade, they actually helped me get started some years ago. I think we're up to, 3.2 or 4 million followers, which we're very happy about, and we get out a lot of information to people that way. It's at Sean Hannity if you want to go there. And one of the things I do, I just have my whole staff has access to my account at any time. And but one of the things that we do is people reach out to me, and they're telling me that they're banned from Twitter. Have you ever heard of this new Twitter-like site? What is it, Gab or?
Gab. Andrew Torba is the CEO of Gab.
Yeah.
He's a friend of mine, and a lot of people are driven traffic to his site because of this.
Yeah, because Twitter in particular now has come under fire for banning people, banning their opinions. And I know people like to go out and Periscope, and they they do live videos and all of this stuff and live Facebook, et cetera. And I think it's a great opportunity for people to be citizen journalists like you're doing. You know, what you're describing here, what your business is no different than what Mike Wallace used to do. And other people at 60 Minutes for years, except you always put out the entire tape, correct?
I usually do. I put more than the networks do, and Sean, I've sometimes released hours of tape. Sometimes I have to protect sources. But Mike Wallace, Upton Sinclair used to do this. There were undercover reporters in the 1960s and 70s who actually went undercover into media organizations. But the media can't abide me. They can't acknowledge there's anything wrong with them. So they have to reject the techniques. But the techniques have been used for 100 years. And in this case, Sean, Twitter I don't know if the government should get involved, but unless the CEO, Jack Dorsey, makes sort of these algorithms public and their HR policies, the government will probably have to get involved, because the stuff that is coming is so bad. When I tell you what's coming, what they do with your private photographs and things that you send your wife, and I'm not making this, it's not my words, this is their words. It is going to shock the conscience of the users on this platform. And the free market is going to create...
So there's no privacy on Twitter, is what you've discovered here. And that there's political...
It's worse than that.
There's political...
It's worse than that.
Censorship and beyond that.
It's beyond... No,
but by the way, that's
one thing.
All of that,
Yeah.
There would be an expectation of privacy on Twitter, especially in your private account. So if they're doing these things, it sounds to me like they're opening themselves up for lawsuits 1,000 different ways.
Yeah, people are going to get sued. People are going to lose their jobs when this whole thing is said and done. The next video is going to be out tomorrow morning. But Sean, this is going to be a catalyst, I think, for a change. I've already heard from James Damore, who sued Google. Him and I have talked a little bit about what's happening.
By the way, I noticed that Charles Johnson and some other people have been suing Twitter of late. He got banned, I guess, in 2015.
Yes, Charles sued Twitter on Monday. I think maybe
there was another lawsuit.
Twitter, James Damore.
Yeah, so there are a lot of people now suing Twitter, and based on this information, you might have made them a lot of money.
They mention some of these people in the videos that are coming out.
All right, got to take a quick break. We'll come back more with James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, and what are people going to do about the loss of privacy and more of what's coming later this week in his investigation. Straight ahead.
FLA, the home of Lightning hockey.
All right, as we continue with James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, and his deep dive into Twitter and social media, I would never, ever, if I worked at such a place, ever think it's within my rights to violate people's privacy. I don't understand why people feel that they can do that.
Sean, you have 15, 20 million, 25 million listeners, however many it is. I want your listeners to tweet at Jack, J-A-C-K, at Jack with this video, and ask them, Jack, what are you going to do about this? You opening people's private DMs, the president's private DMs, and willing to give them to the Justice Department? What are you going to do about tweet at this company? Put pressure on them. Empower people to make change. It's the only way we're going to change the system, because all of your users and all of my supporters use Facebook and Twitter to get the information out. And if they're censoring that and they're manipulating that, we need to know.
I think that's a good idea, because, I recommend people ask politely, at Jack, what are you going to do about this video? James O'Keefe will have you back tomorrow with the latest installment. It's going to be very big. It'll hit tomorrow morning, and we'll have it exclusively here. We're going to show you this video on Hannity tonight, 10 Eastern on the Fox News Channel.